We begin this news hour in Sudan, where a one-week truce has been agreed in principle by the chief of the army and the leader of the rapid paramilitary support forces. The announcement was made by South Sudan's foreign ministry. This at the end of another day of air strikes by the army against suspected paramilitary positions. Several previous ceasefires have failed to hold, and an already dire humanitarian situation is at risk of deteriorating even further. The United Nations says more than 330,000 Sudanese have now been internally displaced and that a further 100,000 have fled to neighboring countries. That number could rise to more than 800,000. Before the latest truce was announced, officials from the UN warned that the humanitarian crisis is turning into what they called a full-blown catastrophe.
For WFP, our biggest concern right now is actually that if the conflict in Sudan doesn't stop soon, the ripple effect across the region is significant. We are already seeing at least 20,000 refugees that have crossed into Chad. Our colleagues in South Sudan are saying a similar number, if not more, is crossing into South Sudan. We are thinking about refugees who are in Sudan going back to their home countries that are not as stable as they should be when they are going back. So the ripple effect for the region is significant. It's a real concern, and we just need to find peace. We need the two parties to the conflict to come together and find a way to resolve the conflict, because this has the possibility of destabilizing the whole region.
We need the guns to fall silent for two reasons. First of all, because we need civilians protected, and clearly they are not. We see a lot of civilians being killed in the hundreds. Secondly, we need that safety in order for us to, for humanitarian organizations to safely get to those people in need, or the other way around, safely for people to move to places where they can access aid. So that is what we are working on. That is, of course, one of the main reasons that the Secretary General dispatched Martin Griffiths to the region to discuss with everyone that he needs to discuss with to try to move the needle on that access.
Well, Arise East Africa correspondent Mark Bichachi has been monitoring developments in the region, and he joins me now live from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Good to see you, Mark. So does it look like the two sides can be convinced to stop the fighting? Because all we're hearing and seeing on the ground appears to be a concerted effort by the two warring sides to try and flush the other out of Khartoum, even though we understand that in principle a 7-day truce has been agreed to start on Thursday.
Thank you for that. Yes, indeed, it is true. We are seeing a sign that the two generals could actually be coming back to their senses. In recent hours, there has been a report from the United Nations that the two generals have agreed not only to cease fire, but also to have consultations, peace talks in Saudi Arabia. We do not have the details about how these peace talks could take shape, but if and when they do, then it would be a good sign that the peace will obtain within the borders of Sudan. What is also critical is this is probably the 7th ceasefire conversation. The ceasefires, what they have actually materialized to be is sporadic ceases of violence, and then violence picks up again. So the situation is not better, but at least there is a bit of light coming through for the Sudanese people.
Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation is deteriorating fast, isn't it? With hospitals under attack and the violence making the delivery of aid near impossible.
Yeah, yes, indeed. The delivery of aid is becoming a key question. And let's remember that Sudan is a food poor country, given its scarce arable land. So it is not just the hospitals. It is the fact that very soon Sudan could be facing starvation. That is one side of the puzzle. The other side of the puzzle is that the Sudanese people could be facing a flooding and rain soon, which would mean people in the Darfur would not be able to access healthcare and be able to exit because the roads are prone to being broken down. So it is hunger on one side, and on the other side, it is also the probability that in 3-4 months, if it rains, people would be further stuck within the Sudan.
And the top UN humanitarian official, Martin Griffiths, is in Sudan or on his way there. And one imagines that getting supplies to those in need is going to be an absolute nightmare in this situation. Can the UN get a grip on this?
Well, the UN has been pushing for a while and asking for the two generals to create a way for which humanitarian aid can move to make sure that they respect the rules of war and ensure that the UN has access, and even the Red Cross and Red Crescent as well. So what the diplomat is hoping to achieve is to rein in the two generals. Number one, to try and create peace. And then number two, to make sure that over 800,000 people now expected to be displaced in the Sudan will have care. Let us also remember it is not just an issue in Sudan itself, it's an issue around the countries as well, in Chad and in Egypt, and making sure that these people who are fleeing the area also get the assistance they need.
Well, absolutely, because the UN Refugee Agency has been giving further estimates of that refugee situation and warning that any escalation in the violence will trigger further flows in all the directions of west to Egypt, north to Chad, and south to South Sudan.
Yes. The number expected now is 800,000. We have reports that 20,000 have been registered in South Sudan as well. The numbers are increasing by the day. And now being able to provide these people with the help they need is difficult because Chad, as you know, is not a wealthy country, neither is South Sudan. South Sudan itself is also reeling from the effects of violence. So the issue here is not just getting the aid as well, but the real concern that this movement of people, proliferation of arms by various rebel groups, for example, in northern Ethiopia, where there was conflict, is also an issue that could, the escalation of issues in the Sudan, then create a greater destabilizing force within the region. So it is both about aid and also making sure that the region remains stable, which is why the presidents of Kenya, South Sudan, and Djibouti have been having concerted efforts to make sure that this particular situation is contained.
Mark, thank you for your reporting. As always, Arise East Africa correspondent Mark Bichachi talking to me there from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi.